You thought awakening would set your soul on fire, but instead, it left you empty. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden phase no one talks about, the sacred silence after the light, the part where your soul stops performing and starts changing. No one warned you that after the moment of awakening comes the silence. That after seeing through the illusion, life itself might lose its color. The things you used to chase no longer matter, and what once gave you purpose now feels hollow. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're not failing. You are standing at the very threshold Carl Jung described, the sacred pause between the death of who you thought you were and the birth of who you truly are. In this video, we're going deep into what really happens after awakening, when the ego collapses but the self hasn't yet taken the throne. We'll talk about the emptiness, the loss of ambition, the strange fog of stillness, and why that void isn't your downfall, but your transformation. If you've been feeling disconnected after a spiritual breakthrough, if your spark has gone quiet and you're secretly afraid that you've lost your path, this video is your mirror. Stay with me, because what you're feeling is not the end. Carl Jung warned what happens after spiritual awakening, and he was right. They said awakening would be beautiful, that once your eyes were open, you'd walk in peace, radiating light. But no one mentioned the silence. No one told you about the ache that would follow. And certainly, no one warned you that after enlightenment, you might feel lost, empty, even numb. But Jung did. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And he meant it. What he called the nigredo, the dark night of the soul, is not a myth. It's not a glitch in your spiritual journey. It's a necessary phase. A descent into stillness that cracks the illusion of who you thought you were. And if you're feeling unmotivated, disconnected, or even apathetic right now, you're not alone. In fact, you might be exactly where your soul needs you to be. In this video, we're going to talk about that quiet, uncomfortable space after awakening. What happens when the ego dies, and nothing rushes in to replace it. You'll discover why the numbness makes sense, why your drive vanished, and how to navigate the sacred confusion that so many mistake for failure. Because Carl Jung warned us, and it's time someone explained why he was right. They don't tell you this part. When people speak of spiritual awakening, they paint it in gold, like a sunrise or a divine revelation. But in reality, what comes after often feels more like a blackout. A sudden drop in signal. A moment where everything familiar disappears, not with a bang, but with a breath. And in that breath? Silence. The kind of silence that feels less like peace and more like being suspended in space. This is the hidden phase no one warns you about. That after the light cracks you open, a stillness moves in. Your old life doesn't fit anymore, but the new one hasn't yet arrived. You're awake and utterly disoriented. He used to wake up every day with a checklist, coffee, work, approval, repeat. And what about now? He stares at the ceiling for hours, not because he's lazy, but because the engine inside him stopped humming. That inner motor, once driven by fear of failure or thirst for recognition, is gone. And here's the thing, it's not depression. It's the collapse of false purpose. A friend told him, "I used to chase success just to feel alive. Now that I've awakened, I don't even know what I want anymore." That's not apathy, that's awakening. And it's terrifying if you don't understand what's happening. Carl Jung called this the nigredo, the blackening, the death of the false self. And in alchemical psychology, that stage isn't a breakdown. It's a purification, like burning away the dross to reveal gold. But in modern life, where hustle is king and stillness is weakness, we label this phase as a problem. People ask, "Why do I feel empty after spiritual awakening?" As if something went wrong. But Jung would say, something went right. Something just got real. It's not that your soul lost its spark. It's that the noise is gone, and you can finally hear your inner truth whisper. What makes this phase so disorienting is that your former motivators, the praise, the paycheck, the applause, stop working. They no longer give you the dopamine hit they once did. It's like biting into your favorite food and tasting nothing. Suddenly, the goals you built your identity around collapse like paper walls. You're not lazy. You're in spiritual withdrawal from the world's addictions. This is why so many people search for spiritual awakening, loss of motivation. It's not a failure. It's a detox. And that's exactly why it feels so quiet. You might notice it in little things. The thrill of buying something new disappears. The urge to impress others fades. Even laughter feels different, softer, more hollow. It's like you're watching your old life through glass. And the scariest part? No one around you seems to notice. They keep moving, working, smiling, and you wonder, did something break in me? But what really happened is that the performance ended. And now, you're standing on an empty stage, not sure what role to play anymore. That's not the end. It's the beginning of authenticity. This is where the search begins, not for more answers, but for deeper questions. You stop asking, how do I succeed? And start asking, what matters when no one's watching? The spiritual high is over. Now it's about the work, the slow rebuilding, the integration of silence into your walk. People mistake this phase for the end of growth, but it's where the real growth begins. You're learning to sit with the void, to not fill it, to not fight it, because what's coming isn't performance-driven. It's soul-led. But first, you must surrender the noise. And in that surrender, a door begins to creak open. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small shift, a subtle pull inward, toward something real, something unshakable. And as that door opens, a question begins to rise. If the ego isn't in charge anymore, then who is? That's the moment the soul clears its throat. But it doesn't speak just yet. Not until the noise is gone, and the heart is ready. What comes next isn't clarity, it's confusion with purpose. And in that confusion, something ancient is trying to speak. He sat there, on a park bench, watching people pass with purpose. Mothers pushing strollers, businessmen on phones, joggers chasing goals. He used to be one of them, busy, driven, obsessed with being seen. But now, after everything he's realized, it's like the engine inside him is silent. Not broken, just done. That's the moment when the ego falls. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a quiet letting go. And when it collapses, something strange happens. You don't feel triumphant. You feel empty, numb. That's not failure. It's the absence of the old self that once narrated your every move. The ego isn't evil. It's a mask, a tool, a necessity even in a world that values roles, titles, and performance. But awakening burns that mask. Suddenly, you're not playing the role of the achiever, or the good child, or the rebel. You're just you. But who is that? Without the costume, without the applause, the silence becomes deafening. This is what leads so many to wonder, is apathy after awakening normal? And the answer is yes. If the driver steps out of the vehicle, it takes time before a new force takes the wheel. That pause is sacred. Beneath that stillness, something new begins to stir. Not loud, not fast. Just a whisper. The self. Jung's greatest insight was that we don't become whole by perfecting the ego. We become whole by integrating the deeper self. And the self doesn't shout like the ego. It hums. It doesn't chase, it draws. In the absence of noise, it becomes audible. But only to those willing to sit still long enough to hear it. That's the part many skip. They expect lightning bolts. What comes is more like a breeze. A subtle alignment you can't explain, but can feel. This is when you start hearing a new voice, one that doesn't say, you should, but instead asks, do you want to? You stop pursuing things out of fear or habit. You start waiting until something resonates. That's the difference between the ego's drive and the soul's whisper. One is urgent. The other is eternal. And here's where many get stuck. The ego thrives on urgency. It wants progress, visibility, impact. Now. But the soul is patient. It waits for truth to arrive on its own time. That's why so many call this phase a spiritual depression. But it's really just detox. Carl Jung knew that we can't force individuation. The individuation process explained simply is this: the journey from persona to presence, from performance to essence. And that journey is quiet. You no longer perform to be accepted, you begin to show up as you are. This is not glamorous. It's raw, it's slow, and it's real. There will be days when you wonder if you're wasting time. Days when the old version of you tempts you back into productivity traps. But if you can resist that pull, just long enough, something profound begins to take root. Think of the ego like the scaffolding of a building, necessary during construction. But eventually, it must come down. And when it does, there's a strange feeling, freedom mixed with disorientation. You don't know how to live without it yet. That's where the numbness comes from. Not from a lack of purpose, but from the space before new purpose is formed. This is when people try to go back to old habits, working harder, chasing success, but those things no longer fit. They taste hollow now. Because you've changed. The story changed. And now the script is gone. And yet, in this unstructured space, the seed of true motivation is being planted. One that doesn't scream. One that doesn't need approval to bloom. This seed grows in silence. In honesty. In realigned values. The question isn't, how do I get my fire back? It's, what kind of fire do I even want to carry now? This is the soul's whisper. And it only rises when the ego gets quiet enough to let it speak. That whisper becomes the compass. But before it can guide you, you'll need to learn how to listen differently. He used to find comfort in distractions, podcasts, background noise, the dopamine drip of to-do lists. But after awakening, none of it worked anymore. He would lie in bed, alert but blank, thinking, something's wrong with me. That's how this phase creeps in, not as panic, but as a slow dissolve. A heavy fog. It's easy to mistake this for burnout or clinical depression. And in a culture that fears stillness, the label comes quick. But let's be clear, this isn't dysfunction. This is descent. The kind Carl Jung described as necessary for transformation. A sacred descent into the unconscious. This is the part where the spiritual journey feels less like climbing a mountain and more like being buried beneath it. You're not broken, you're becoming. And that becoming happens underground. In darkness. In silence. Jung knew this space well. He wrote about the dark night of the soul, a phase where the ego dissolves and nothing rushes in to replace it. It's not pretty. It's not poetic. It's disorienting. But it's not pathology. This is why so many turn to Google and ask, what happens after ego death? Because they feel like they're losing their grip on reality. And in truth they are. But it's the false reality that's slipping away. During this sacred descent, the body slows. The spirit retreats. You may lose interest in things you used to love. You may feel emotionally flat, like you're watching your life through glass. This is where post-awakening spiritual depression becomes a popular search term. But again, this isn't the kind of depression that needs curing. It's a pause. A recalibration. The soul is shedding what no longer serves. But because our society pathologizes anything that doesn't look productive, this stillness is often feared. We medicate silence. We escape solitude. But this time, there's nowhere to run. People often describe it like this: I feel like I've lost my spark. Like I'm just floating. That floating feeling isn't aimlessness, it's space. Space for something new. But the human mind doesn't like space. It rushes to fill it with worry, with noise, with meaning. Jung warned us about this, about mistaking the quiet stages of growth for regression. He believed that transformation requires retreat, that silence is not a void, but a womb, a place where new life is gestating. If you can hold steady in the fog, if you can resist filling it, clarity will come on its own. Everyday life becomes a mirror during this phase. Small things feel strange. Grocery shopping becomes surreal. Conversations feel artificial. It's like watching actors in a play you no longer believe in. This is when people start asking hard questions. Why am I even doing this job? Why do I hang out with these people? Why do I dress this way? These aren't signs of a breakdown. These are signs of awakening. You're shedding layers, shedding roles. And in the process, everything that once propped up your identity begins to wobble. It's not collapse, it's clearing. The fire inside didn't die, it burned away the lies. The plans that were built on survival, not soul. The relationships that fed your fear of abandonment. The goals that were rooted in proving your worth. That fire purifies. And once it's done, it leaves you in ashes, not as punishment, but as preparation. This is where shadow work after enlightenment often begins. Old wounds rise. Unprocessed grief comes forward. And for the first time, you're not running. You're not numbing. You're listening. That's when you know something sacred is happening beneath the surface. And it's in this sacred space that something unexpected begins to grow. Not clarity, not excitement, but honesty. A realness that doesn't perform. A softness that doesn't need to pretend. This is the cocoon. You're not meant to fly yet. You're meant to sit in the goo of your becoming, unformed, undefined. And in that waiting, a subtle strength begins to rise. You can't rush this. You can't shortcut it. But if you stay, if you trust the descent, you'll feel the faint rhythm of something real. And that rhythm is preparing to move you, but not up, inward. Emily had been floating for weeks. After her awakening, she felt untouchable, as if nothing could faze her. She told her friends, "I'm detached now. I've transcended all this." But slowly, her relationships grew cold. Her passions faded, and her sense of joy dimmed. What she thought was enlightenment was actually avoidance. This is the trap of spiritual bypassing, mistaking emotional numbness for spiritual maturity. Many people reach this point after awakening. They say, nothing matters, but really, they're afraid to re-engage with life. What Jung taught us is clear. Awakening isn't escape. It's integration. Real transformation doesn't mean floating above your problems. It means walking back into them with your eyes open and your heart exposed. The truth is, the self doesn't want to pull you away from life. It wants to express itself through life, through your work, your relationships, your voice. Detachment has a purpose, but only when it's temporary. If it becomes a lifestyle, it quickly turns into avoidance. Carl Jung warned that refusing to confront your own shadow is one of the most dangerous illusions on the path to wholeness. And that shadow always waits, just beneath the surface. This is where shadow work after enlightenment begins. Not when everything is calm, but when old wounds start knocking again. Emily noticed it in subtle ways: irritation with her partner, sadness she couldn't explain, memories she hadn't touched in years. These weren't signs of regression. They were invitations. The awakening created space, and now her psyche was ready to bring up what had been buried. This work isn't glamorous. It doesn't look like meditation with candles or serene yoga poses. It's messy, emotional, and deeply human. But it's also the most honest part of the journey. Think of it like cleaning out a house. You can't just repaint the walls and call it transformation. You've got to open closets, lift rugs, and deal with what's been ignored. That's what the soul wants, not polish, but truth. Shadow work doesn't mean obsessing over pain. It means acknowledging it, holding space for it, letting it speak without judgment. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But when you finally sit down and listen, the healing begins, not from escape, but from embrace. In daily life, this shows up in moments you usually dismiss. When someone cuts you off in traffic and you explode, that's a wound talking. When you ghost someone who gets too close, that's fear of intimacy. These aren't flaws. They're messages. Spiritual awakening brings them to light, not to punish you, but to liberate you. Once you stop judging these reactions and start investigating them, you begin the true path to wholeness. It's no longer about avoiding the dark. It's about dancing with it, understanding it, and ultimately dissolving its power through awareness. This phase also reveals the cost of pretending. When you bypass, people notice. Relationships grow distant. Conversations feel hollow. You might say, I've outgrown them, but often it's not growth, it's withdrawal. Authenticity means letting people see your mess, your grief, your softness. It means showing up, not as the awakened guru, but as the human being who is still becoming. That's where the soul breathes. That's where integration lives. Not in the clouds, but in the dirt, where roots form. And it's right there, in the middle of the mess, that something begins to change. The pain doesn't disappear, but your resistance to it does. You start recognizing that even your darkest emotions carry light, if you're willing to sit with them. And when you do, something real begins to rise from underneath the shadow. It's not a new personality. It's not an identity upgrade. It's something quieter, deeper, and just when you think you might drown in all that emotional weight, a new kind of energy starts to stir. Daniel had always been a hustler, the kind of guy who couldn't sit still. If he wasn't building, fixing, planning, or proving something, he felt useless. But after his awakening, after the void, the silence, the descent, something changed. He didn't want to hustle anymore. Not because he was lazy, but because the old reasons were gone. The applause didn't matter. The paycheck didn't inspire him. That loss of drive scared him at first. But eventually, something softer emerged. A whisper. A new kind of motivation that didn't scream for urgency. It simply aligned. This was the soul speaking. This new motivation didn't arrive like a thunderbolt. It rose like a tide, slow, deep, undeniable. Daniel started creating again, but not out of pressure. He spoke, painted, cooked, helped, but from a place of yes, not should. This shift confused people around him. "You're so calm now," they'd say. "Don't you want more?" But he did want more, just not that more. Not the race. Not the recognition. What he wanted now was resonance. What resonated with truth, not with the chase. And that's the difference between ego-driven ambition and soul-led devotion. When the ego leads, it's all about effort and urgency. Timelines. Metrics. Deadlines. But when the self begins to move, it moves differently. No screaming. No pushing. Just presence. Jung once described this process as the return of the symbolic life, where meaning arises not from performance, but from deep connection. The soul doesn't operate on hustle. It follows rhythm, nature, alignment, and that's what began to shape Daniel's days. He wasn't slower, he was deeper, more precise. His work wasn't about quantity anymore. It was about truth. In real life, this shows up in how you choose. You stop saying yes to everything just to stay relevant. You let go of opportunities that drain you, even if they're lucrative. You begin noticing what your body says before your mind justifies it. That email that makes your chest tighten? You don't send it. That call that excites your gut? You answer. You stop ignoring those cues. That's the self at work. This isn't magical thinking, it's embodied wisdom. This is what so many people mean when they search for, "Why do I feel empty after spiritual awakening?" Because before the real yes rises, the false ones must fall. The biggest transformation is this: your ambition doesn't vanish. It evolves. It becomes devotion to what's real, to what brings peace, to what reflects your truest self back to you. Daniel still had goals, but they weren't about proving his worth anymore. They were about honoring his alignment. He still showed up every day, but not to chase applause, to create something alive. And that's the mark of soul-led motivation. It doesn't look like burnout. It looks like presence, like breathing, like showing up fully, with nothing to prove and everything to give. This shift creates a strange feeling of power, but it's not dominance. It's clarity. You're not trying to be louder than others. You're just grounded in something unshakable. That's what people start to feel around you. Not noise, but depth. You become magnetic, not by performing, but by being. And that's the quiet revolution. The soul doesn't want spotlight. It wants substance. And when you align with it, you stop craving attention, because you're finally giving yourself the attention that matters. And this is where the story really begins. Because now, everything that comes next, your relationships, your purpose, your service, isn't about escaping yourself. It's about expressing yourself. Fully. Openly. Authentically. What you create now won't be a performance. It'll be a transmission. Of presence. Of truth. Of the silent, steady flame that began deep in the silence, and now wants to light the world in a different way. There comes a moment when you stop asking, "When will I feel normal again?" and start realizing you're not meant to. Because the person you were, the one fueled by noise, striving, and performance, has already dissolved. What remains is someone unfamiliar, quieter, more discerning. Someone who listens not just with the ears, but with the soul. This is what Carl Jung called the symbolic life. A life no longer dictated by schedules and roles, but by signs, synchronicities, dreams, and deep internal resonance. You no longer live by scripts. You live by signals, by sensations that rise from within, a conversation that lingers, a dream that won't let go, a moment of silence that says more than any advice. You begin to notice patterns, not coincidences, but confirmations. Your life becomes less about making things happen and more about responding to what's already calling. And slowly, you stop chasing alignment and start living inside it. But here's the paradox. The deeper you go, the less clear it gets, at least at first. The more you trust the self, the less control the ego has. And that can feel terrifying. This is why so many stop at the threshold. They feel the fire begin to flicker and they retreat. But if you stay, if you lean in, you'll begin to notice that flame doesn't just return, it changes color. It burns differently, deeper, quieter, but with a heat that lasts. You are not who you were. And that is the greatest proof that something real is unfolding. If you're feeling empty, unmotivated, or distant from the world you once fit into, that may be your invitation. Not to go back, but to go further. Because what happens after ego death isn't a void. It's a realignment. And it's just beginning. The world isn't ending. The mask is. And now, the soul finally has room to speak. So listen. Not with fear, but with wonder. Stay in the silence long enough, and you'll begin to feel the symbolic language rise. Images, instincts, inner truths that bypass logic and point you toward your next becoming. This isn't about religion. This is about reconnection. To a self that isn't trying to win, just trying to be whole. And if this spoke to something inside you, stay close. This is just one layer of the awakening path. More is coming. Subscribe. Reflect. Revisit this message when the fog returns. Because it will. And so will the self.